Hi, this is Christopher Hobbs, and let's talk about tea. Camellia sinensis is the Latin binomial, and it is a very special plant, as I'm sure you know. Here's a picture of it, and you can see the creamy white flowers, elliptical leaves, the fruits, and as you also likely know, it's the small, young, tender leaves that are used for green tea, or when they're fermented for black tea. Here is an ancient tree, green tea tree. I never knew that they grew so big and mossy covered like this. This tree is really ancient. Later I've got some pictures of people actually up in the tree picking the tea. And you might have heard of monkey pick tea, and I always wondered, well, I imagine the monkeys were climbing up in the tree, these giant trees, and getting out in those very, very slender branches and picking the little tea leaves. So if they can induce the monkeys to pick the tea leaves, then they have monkey pick tea. And this is a very expensive tea, too, in China. So green tea is the second most widely consumed beverage in the world after water. And it's not Coca-Cola. Just kidding. There are three main varieties of tea depending on the type of processing: green tea, black tea, and oolong. And green tea has been just shade dried. The young tender leaves of the tea plant are shade dried, and then that's green tea. And of course there are all different types of grades. So there's the very, very tiny leaves which are covered with white hairs. That's white tea. And then once the leaves start to expand and get a little bit larger, but they're still very, very tender and sweet, then that is a higher quality green tea. Once the leaves get older and the leaves get thicker, then they get more bitter. They don't have the nice sweet flavor. And of course it depends on the variety, how the green tea will taste, how much theanine it has in it, and how much of the caffeine-like compounds. And so the three types, green, black, and oolong. Green tea is just, again, the picked green leaves that are shade dried. The black has been fermented, and oolong tea is half fermented. So some contraindications for green tea include when you're taking blood thinners, when you have anxiety or insomnia, or if you have arrhythmias. These might be some contraindications for using green tea as regularly every day as a remedy. So the history of tea, it's a complex history. It's been known likely for thousands of years. In fact, writings show that it might have been used as a medicinal drink during the Shang dynasty, which was 1600 all the way back to 1046 before Common Era. And it generally is considered that it originated from the Yellow River Valley in China. There are some morphological differences between different types of varieties, and then scientists or botanists have proposed, or biogeographists have proposed, a dual origin for tea. Maybe it arose in two different places or had a common ancestor a long, long time ago. However, hybridization is very easy. They freely hybridize. And other work besides looking at the genetics and doing phylogenetic analysis, lining up DNA sequences, supports typically a single origin in Yunnan province. So in traditional Chinese medicine, green tea is widely used and prescribed. And here is probably the greatest and the most famous of all Chinese materia medicas, which was published by Li Shizhen in 1578. It brought together all the knowledge that was known about herbal medicine in the world, in the known world at the time, and it was all compiled together by this herbalist. And it's still available now in print, and it's been translated into English, maybe about 10 years ago. The complete English version was available. And when you really read through, I mean, it's in so many volumes. It's a massive work. And I think it's around 6 volumes. So here are some of the traditional uses. Draining heat from the gallbladder. So perhaps as a remedy for gallbladder problems and gallbladder inflammation. Emetic therapy, because if you drink green tea on an empty stomach, you will definitely purge. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I have, and it's not a pleasant feeling. So if you drink a big, strong cup of green tea on an empty stomach, it's very likely that you would purge. It can induce perspiration to relieve the surface heat for rashes and skin infections, and in the early stages of influenza. It's good for treating dysentery due to lack of pathogenic heat and toxin, so it can help drive out the pathogenic heat and toxins from the body in a manner of purification or cleansing. It's also known to treat asthma with excessive heat, so hot types of asthma when there's inflammation. It treats somnolence, obviously, in patients not able to wake up. So we know that for a fact, that if you're on a long drive, of course, many people use coffee, but green tea is, I believe, healthier, certainly. And it's got the theanine in it, which makes it kind of a more relaxing and a more calming stimulation than coffee. It's also used for painful urination. It's a really great diuretic, which helps free up the urine, and it just really moves it out of the body, helps it drain. And one thing that I thought was quite funny from the Pen Sao, you could call it, Ben Sao Gong Mu, is it's good for treating tea addiction. Well, that's good, but that's like saying cocaine is a very good remedy for treating cocaine addiction. Not sure how helpful that is. So tea ceremony. Tea ceremony is practiced in several Asian countries, in India and certainly in China and Japan. There are all kinds of tea ceremonies and rituals because it's so highly revered. It really is a treasure, cultural treasures. And in Japan, if you take green tea, some very fine small leaves of green tea, certain grades, and you micro powder them to very, very small particle size, then that's called matcha. And you just take a little bit of that and mix it in hot water, and that's very, very potent. And matcha is used in the way of tea ceremony, which is a ritual social practice where they have prescribed steps and accoutrements like certain pots and strainers and so forth, cups, obviously, and they look very, very artistic. There's usually a flower arrangement, and usually there's a performance as well that goes along with it. And it's usually tied in with a cultural activity for hospitality. So respecting a guest, for instance, if a guest comes, if it's an honored guest, and also for wedding ceremonies. So in wedding ceremonies, the couple serves tea to the parents, thanking them for being parents. Boy, that would sure feel good for my teenager, I'll tell you. I hope you don't mind some of these asides. So the first written records were the 9th century Common Era. So that's a long time ago. That's what? That's 11 centuries, 12 centuries, 11 centuries. That's a long time. Here is a map showing the Fertile Crescent, where we believe that green tea arose. So it's partly China and a little bit in India and Burma and the very north of Thailand and Laos and Vietnam is where the Fertile Crescent is, where tea has grown quite a bit. Now, let's talk about extraction of green tea. I have a lot of experience with this because I was a big green tea drinker all through graduate school. That really helped me. I really enjoyed the flavor of it. I loved green tea. I never have been a coffee drinker, and I don't drink black tea too much. I really just drank a lot of green tea. And I drank green tea in the way that they do in China. When I finished my acupuncture training and took my license and passed it, the California boards, then I went over to China, Hangzhou, which is a garden city, and my teacher in Santa Cruz arranged for me to enter a school there, a training program at a traditional hospital in Hangzhou. And that was really a wonderful, wonderful experience, which I'm not going to go into too much detail now, but only to relate an anecdote that I was studying with a Chinese herbalist that had seen 100,000 patients, he claimed, over the years. He was getting on in years, no doubt. And so I was fortunate enough to have a translator next to me, and he would see, 20, 30, 40 patients a day, and I was able to sit there at the table and look at the patient's tongue, feel their pulse, and then hear his diagnosis. So that was really terrific. And so one day he was taking a break where he was going to have some tea, and he pulled out his stash and he showed me what he was doing. He poured it into his glass canning jar, and everywhere that you go, whether it's in a cab, it's in a hospital, it's in a market, they have these red-topped thermoses, which everyone knows is where the hot water is. So then he filled his cup and he started drinking his green tea. So then I noticed that, and and the next time I came, I wanted to be, I wanted to join him. I didn't want to be left out. He kind of looked at me a little scornfully that I wasn't drinking green tea at the time. And so the next time I came, he pulled out his green tea on a break and he started putting his green tea in. And then I pulled my jar out and I took my stash of green tea out and put a little bit in, maybe, about a half an inch in the bottom of the jar, and started to get the water and pour it in. And he looked at me and shook his head and smiled, and he took out his stash and he poured about at least a third of the jar full of green tea. And then he filled it up with hot water. And that must have been so strong that, I noticed that he was talking a lot faster after he started drinking his green tea, and he looked a lot more bright-eyed afterwards. And so he shook his head at me, and he reached out his hand to grab my jar, and then he filled it up with about a third of green tea, poured the hot water on it, and man, that stuff, he had a good grade. That stuff was really, really potent. So after that, I kind of developed the habit of drinking green tea on and off, but when I got to graduate school at Berkeley, then I really started drinking green tea, as there was just so much work to do and such long days. So I drank it all through there, and then I continued with it after that. But it's been about 3 months now. I finally quit all caffeine, and now I'm off caffeine right now. So we'll see how long that goes, but it feels good right now not to be drinking caffeine. It does interfere with my sleep after a while. But what I found in drinking a lot of green tea over the years is that it's very important how you brew it. So here is a chart showing that if you, the changes in composition, first of all, the first chart, table 3, changes in composition of leaf during the manufacture of green and black teas from the same fresh source. So Camellia sinensis variety Assamica, or Assam tea. So and you can see the number of catechins, which again are the medicinal parts, the antioxidants, and the caffeine as well. So you're seeing here that freshly plucked tea shoots, the first flush, is high in caffeine, but not as high as some of the other fermentation methods and withering it and so forth. So it's actually the lowest amount of caffeine is in the freshly plucked tea shoots. But if you wither the leaf, then it's about 3.57% caffeine. Of course, it's going to have less water in it. If you have the partly fermented rolled leaf, then it goes up even higher, 3.75, and then has different stages of fermentation, which you can see that you can get up to, after 2 hours of fermentation, 3.69% of caffeine. Even after an hour of fermentation, it still goes up. And the fired leaf is still pretty stable. However, the catechin level goes way down after fermentation. And the reason for that, the catechins are actually tannins. They're small tannins, like molecules, and they are astringent and they are irritating to the mucous membranes. That's why in England, for instance, they use fermented tea, mostly black tea, and then they add milk. And the milk binds up some of the catechins. So the catechins will bind to the proteins in the milk and reduce the amount of free catechins to irritate. So the smoothest on the mucous membranes in the stomach is the fermented leaf. You can see after 2 hours of fermentation, and even the fired leaf after 2 hours of fermentation has a very low amount of catechins, while it still has a significant amount of caffeine. Now, the green tea process, you can see that they have short withered leaf, pan-fired green leaf, shaped green leaf. I'm not sure what they do for that. And then fired green leaf again. And the fired green leaf seems to be, in other words, roasted, slightly roasted, seems to have the highest percentage of caffeine. And also very high in catechins. But, you know, that's how it goes with the catechins. The catechins are medicinal, anti-inflammatory, and anti-cancer. However, they are also irritating to the gut if they're too high a level. So I tend to drink a green tea with a little bit of soy milk in it, and that tends to bind up some of the catechins so it isn't as harsh on the stomach. And the second thing that you can do is the brewing time. So again, the brewing time is very, very important. Let me see if I have a slide on the next with a chart on it here. The lower chart is just the composition of green tea and caffeine from different origins, and they all vary depending on whether you can see Darjeeling, which seems to be very high, Assam, or let's see, Darjeeling, no, that's not as high as Assam, so Assam tea seems to be the highest, or Sri Lankan, or is that, no, it's Vietnamese. Here's a chart that shows the brewing time. So if you boil the water and then pour it on, excuse me. So if you brew the green tea again, you're seeing 30-second brew time, 60-second, and then you're seeing a 3-minute brewing time. And you're seeing, first of all, well, actually, the first chart here, back up a little bit, the first chart is showing the effect of brewing time and the concentration of the tea in the liquid. So how many grams of tea per liter of water. And what they're showing here is that the more tea you put in, and then will affect obviously the solids that you could find in the tea. So in other words, the amount of constituents overall that are coming out of the tea. So obviously, the more grams per liter, you're getting much higher solid content. You're getting up to, as you can see here, 2,500 is the amount of solids, versus if you brew for 60 seconds, which is double, you're getting 3,500 or 29% solids. Whereas if you brew for 3 minutes, then you're getting 51. So brewing time, this just shows that brewing time and the amount of green tea that you put in is really going to increase the amount of active compounds in the tea, in the finished tea. Now here, the bottom chart is brewing time. And first of all, you're seeing a brewing time of half a minute, 2 minutes, or sorry, yeah, 2 minutes. And then 5 minutes. The amount of catechins you can see goes way up after 5 minutes. So in 30-second brewing time, you're getting 108. That's probably maybe micrograms per. They don't really say. Oh, let's see, milligrams per liter. There it is, milligrams per liter. So you're getting 108 milligrams per liter. At a half a minute brewing time, you're getting 159 milligrams per liter, 1 minute, and then it goes up to 2 minutes is 227, so it's slowing down. And then finally, 5 minutes, you're getting 286, just about, milligrams per liter. So that's quite a bit more. However, you're also getting a lot more catechins. So what you want to do is you want to get a reasonable amount of caffeine out and a lower amount of catechins. We want some catechins, but we don't want too much catechins. That's going to irritate the stomach. And if you're drinking green tea for years, like I did, and other people that I know, then that could have an irritating effect on your stomach over the years. And I worry about that causing gastritis or even increasing a risk of stomach cancer. Though the catechins themselves also have anti-cancer effects. So how do you sort that out? You just have to do some type of a large analysis where you can and there may be studies like this, I haven't seen them, where you track the consumption of tea of large numbers of people through a questionnaire and follow-up, and then track the number of cancers, especially stomach cancer, and see if it's correlated in some way. But I like to strike a balance. I don't want too many catechins in there. I don't want it to be too harsh. So that shows that really maybe a 2-minute brewing time, you're going to get a lot of the caffeine out. You're going to get 72% or 73% of the caffeine, while you're only getting about 57% of the catechins that are available that you can pull out of it. But if you go up to 5 minutes, you're going to get 82% catechins. But the caffeine content only goes up, 19 more points, is it? Less than 18 more percentage points. So anyway, you can play with it. My brew time is usually about 4 minutes, and I think that strikes a reasonable balance there. Also on the right here, you're seeing the graph showing the effect of brewing time on the caffeine to catechin ratio of an infusion. And so if you want more caffeine and less catechins, then again you can go up to, they're showing up to 5 minutes here. And whereas when you first start out, actually you're getting the best ratio, and then the ratio is going down as it goes on, at least in this particular study. But I found that about 4 minutes is a good balance to strike for. But if you brew it for a long time, they didn't really look at that here. But if you brew green tea, and I've done that before, I used to just leave it in the jar for an hour and then drink it later. It was so strong and harsh, but there wasn't that much more caffeine in it than just brewing it for 4 minutes. That's my main point. And you're showing the law of diminishing returns. You're getting almost all the caffeine out, as you can see, within 5 minutes. So why go beyond that? So I guess that's the real takeaway here. So here are the active constituents for green tea. They contain purines such as caffeine and others, polyphenols, again, which are like the catechins, flavonoids, which are antioxidants, and amino acids like L-theanine, which is a very calming substance, and then some trace minerals. Green tea actually is a good source of trace minerals. However, green tea also increases urine output. So is that getting rid of some of the trace minerals that you got in the tea? That's a question. The catechins are flavon 3-ols, and so they're a type of flavonoid, modified flavonoid, and they can be, though, longer chains, which are more tannin-like, more soluble tannins, hydrolyzable tannins they're called. And these consist or approximately represent about 59% of the total catechins, these epigallocatechins, which e.g. CG they call them, which have a lot of research on them showing their anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory effects and protective effects. The bioavailability of tea catechins is variable depending on individual and specific compounds and how much is consumed, of course. Here's kind of a science summary on tea, drinking tea for health and for their benefits. Tea has a positive effect on blood sugar and insulin regulation. And you can see the studies here. Green tea can lower low-density lipoprotein levels as well as triglyceride levels and prevent LDL oxidation. LDL, or low-density lipoprotein oxidation, is one of the key etiologic factors, or at least it is a major marker of our risk for developing cardiovascular disease. So green tea does have a lot of proven benefits for protecting the cardiovascular system. So likely the most supported diet ingredient for both energy and for weight loss. Now that ephedrine is gone, green tea has become widely popular in the dietary supplement industry, and it's found in many forms, but you'll see green tea extract standardized to caffeine in a lot of diet products and a lot of energy products because obviously it contains caffeine, and manufacturers can say, well, yes, there's caffeine in there, but green tea also has some real health benefits, the antioxidant, anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory benefits, and so forth. And at the same time, it can speed up the metabolism and help us burn fat. And also, it suppresses the appetite, as caffeine does, and increases alertness. So it's become a fantastically popular dietary supplement ingredient in our industry. And I used to formulate with it a lot because it's so proven, it's so time-honored, it has so many positive benefits. And yes, caffeine has some drawbacks, especially if it's overused, which I'll get to in a minute. But overall, I think moderate green tea use is mostly healthy. It can help reduce blood pressure a little bit, according to one study. And systematic reviews and meta-analysis and epidemiological studies support anti-cancer effects for various cancers, including endometrial cancer, according to this study, Zhao et al. 2015. It also has a mild hepatoprotective effect. However, some rare cases of hepatotoxicity have been reported, but this is rare. And it also depends if the person is taking other drugs like aspirin that have hepatotoxic effects. It might potentiate it. In large studies, green tea consumption, which is dose dependent, was inversely related with mortality from heart disease in men and women. Also up to a 33% reduction in diabetes risk. So that's pretty fantastic, especially if you drink green tea or caffeine. And what I always used to tell my patients in my clinic, because a lot of people would come in and they were drinking coffee, I'd say, well, get the benefit with the buzz. Even though coffee does have some antioxidants in it, it's not nearly as potent as an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory and is a calming effect from the L-theanine than green tea is. So I always used to tell people, get the benefit with the buzz and switch to green tea instead of coffee. And I do believe that it is healthier. So let's talk a little bit about L-theanine. Here's the molecule here you're seeing. It's a small amino acid-like compound. It's not one that's very commonly found in nature. It's not found in coffee or yerba mate, but it's pretty high in green tea. And that's one reason why green tea is thought to be so popular, because it's such a relaxing source of caffeine. It has a balanced stimulating effect due to the theanine, and here are a number of studies that have looked at that aspect of it. Several studies on L-theanine have demonstrated anti-stress effects, and here are a bunch of studies, increases in attention, so that would work along with the caffeine, alertness, and improvements in sleep quality. And this is pure L-theanine, and also memory. So how can you lose? Green tea has the benefits of L-theanine, which makes it really special for these side benefits rather than side effects. It's also, theanine is thought to bind to GABA receptors, which can reduce excitability and nervousness. Here is a picture of a wild green tea in the mountains of Yunnan. So these are ancient trees, and you can see the pickers up in there, which is pretty amazing, climbing up in there and picking the small little leaves from the green tea. And this is a wild ancient green tea that I borrowed from the Yunnan Long Run Tea Company group.